So thank you so much, Dr. Chuck Wysocki, for joining us today for STANA, Sensory Insights. STANA is the Smell and Taste Association of North America. If you're here, you found our YouTube channel, so you probably know a little bit about us, but we're the first patient advocacy organization focused on smell and taste dysfunction in the United States of America, North America in general as well. So Dr. Chuck Wysocki, you're here with us today. Can we start off with first doing a little bit of an introduction of yourself for us?
Certainly. I got my PhD in 1978 from Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. The degree was in what's now called neuroscience. From there, I went on to do a 2-year postdoc in Philadelphia, what was supposed to have been a 2-year postdoc in Philadelphia at the Monell Chemical Senses Center. Turned out to be my career. I spent all of my lifetime of science and experimentation and teaching in Philadelphia out of the Monell Chemical Senses Center.
So why smell? What got you involved in the world of smell?
I turned on to the sense of smell because I was very much interested in individual differences. It was clear to me that hearing, the visual system, these systems were very well studied at the genetic level. Individual differences at the genetic level was just emerging at that point. And I would have been a little fish in the great big pond. And I thought, why not venture off into something else? And at that time, I was studying sensory systems in general at Florida State and decided that smell seems like just an opportune time. And I began work with mice and looking at genetic strains of mice and whether they had differences in their perceptions of different smells. And it turns out that they did. And I began exploring some of those genetic differences well before the time that people were working with DNA specifically. And it just evolved into a lifetime worth of investigating individual differences. And from mice, I migrated up to the study of humans.
So you did a study with the National Geographic, I believe, magazine back in the 70s. And from what I've read, you reached a really large number of people. So first off, what was the study about? And then how did you go about that?
Just a minor correction there. It was in the 1980s. It came out in 1986. It accompanied an article, a very lovely article called The Intimate Sense of Smell, written by Boyd Gibbons. And the National Geographic, as people readers of that magazine know, that smell is an outsider for that particular magazine to focus on. So what they wanted to do at the National Geographic was to grab the readership's attention, basically, and thought that perhaps one way to do that is to engage the reader in using their sense of smell, and came to the Monell Center and interviewed myself and my colleague Avery Gilbert and determined that we were knowledgeable in the area and excited about working with the National Geographic to insert what would later become the National Geographic Smell Survey, on which there were multiple demographic questions about the person who was responding to it, but also 6 little scratch and sniff snippets in there covering different types of smells and different reasons for inserting those smells in this fold out little pamphlet, which basically looked like a little map that people unfolded and did their scratch and sniff on it. And it went out in every magazine that they published. Well, over 10 million copies went out, and we received back usable copies from 1.42 million people.
Wow, that is amazing. So you talked about those 6 different smells that were included, and there was some rationale for doing so. So what 6 scents did you guys decide to include, and why?
Well, I won't give all the scientific names, the chemical names of them, but one smelled like cloves. and it was just a food smell, basically. One smelled, uh, well, for some people, it smelled like it was a stale urine or a nasty smelling underarm. For other people, they couldn't smell it at all. And the reason why we inserted that was to look at some of these individual differences about which I spoke. Some other smells in there were food items. Other smells were just run-of-the-mill things that we use in the laboratory, basically, and wanted to get some basic information about whether there were gender differences, whether there were age differences, regional differences. In fact, the smell survey went out worldwide, so we looked at global differences as well.
That's amazing. So one of the things that comes to mind when I'm thinking about this is the amount of responses that you received and the amount of data that you collected. What was the overall, or what was the most surprising thing to you all when you were collecting data? Were there any surprising results, or were they right on with your hypothesis?
No, they were in fact surprising. Not dramatically surprising, but some of the results were just overwhelming confirmation of some of the ideas that were floating in there. That, for example, that women were supposed to have this keener sense of smell than did men. And sure enough, those data from 1.42 million people show that women typically outperform men when it comes to using their nose. We also had some insights into some health conditions, because we also asked individuals some issues about whether they had any problems with their sense of smell, and many people did. We noticed that there were a number of people that had difficulties answering some of the questions about smells, about what they were smelling, or didn't smell some of the things that we expected them to smell. For example, we had smell of natural gas included in there, and we did in fact find that a very large percentage of people, relative to what we expected to find, could not smell that odor. And one of the first things we did was then communicated with the natural gas industry in the US the information about our findings on the National Geographic Smell Survey. And much to our surprise, which was not known in the general public at that time, was they were well aware of that.
Oh.
But the general community just didn't know about the high percentage of people that could not smell natural gas.
Yeah, so another thing that comes to mind thinking about this study is just logistics. So I'm just curious, was it like postage paid that they sent back a postcard with their responses, and where did they go? Where did the responses go?
Yeah, that was an interesting logistical issue that they had to tackle. And not only was it logistical, it turned out to be consideration for finances. One of the original concepts was to have 26,000 of these coming back to a different post office. After I should say that the responses were part of a fold out, basically a pretty looking map for the type that National Geographic created. And they were then supposed to cut off the ends of it on which they had the responses, fold it and mail it back to a postal address. 26,000 of those were randomly chosen with a different postal address, and that was supposed to form our database. We then went on, after we saw what was happening, and with 26,000, we could not have really done some fine analysis of looking at demographics divided by age, divided by gender, divided by location in the world or anything. By the time you did all those little subdivisions, the pieces of the pie were so small that sample size was just dwindling. We had a meeting with the top echelon of the National Geographic, and our director at Monell at the time joined us, and we convinced them that it would be worth their while, and certainly our efforts would be much more amplified if we could have all of the data collected, not only collected, but paid for by National Geographic to be digitized, and thereby having a huge database, which turned out to be 1.42 million responses. People. And they agreed to spend over $1 million to pay for the data coding and allowing us then access to all those data, which subsequently we then made it available to the general public, who, well, in the general public, I mean by that other laboratories around the world wanting to have access to those data and to look at whatever aspects of those data they wanted.
That's amazing. What were you guys expecting? So when you sent out this survey, or the scratch and sniff map inside the magazine, 10 million copies, usually when people fill out surveys, there's a really small percentage who actually complete and send it back. So were you only expecting the 26,000 people to respond, or did you have high hopes that more would respond, or were you just blown away by that number that you ended up with?
We had high hopes that more would respond. We knew the 26,000 was just a random sampling of their membership. And so we thought we're going to get a lot more than that back. We had no idea how many would be coming back, but it was certainly going out to over 10 million people. When National Geographic they found out they had over 1 million people responding to it. We were ecstatic with those numbers. 1.42 million was a huge database for us. The National Geographic was a little bit disappointed in their membership, and so they actually did a post-marketing survey of their membership. And what they determined was they did such a great job in preparing the graphics for this insert in their magazine, this National Geographic Smell Survey, that people treated it much like they would treat one of the maps that they get in there. Those maps are cherished. And for them to cut up one of these things, these beautiful inserts that the National Geographic had in their magazine, it was almost immoral for them to do something like that. And so that's what they determined, was that yes, people did the survey, but they did not want to cut it out of that survey form and mail it back in. It was just destroying one of their beautiful things. Yes, it was.
That's good feedback.
It was great. It was great artwork and a great presentation, but it did limit the number of returns that we got. But 1.42 million was greatly appreciated.
That's amazing. What an amazing study. And I'm sure that people have been referencing that data for a long time, and it's been so useful.
And I have still gotten inquiries. Just last year, I got inquiries from people from different labs wanting access to those data.
That's amazing. So great. I kind of want to pivot now. And you mentioned that you ended up with Monell, and you were supposed to be doing a 2-year postdoc there. And it ended up that you were there for quite a lot longer than just the 2 years. So the Monell Chemical Senses Center is based in Philadelphia. Let's talk a little bit about your research there. So what kind of research projects were your favorite when you were at Monell?
They varied tremendously. I started continuing with animal research when I was there, but shifted a little bit away from the genetics of it, because at that time there were no mouse models that people were working at while I was at Monell. Instead, there were other animals that people were working, other laboratory-based animals. And I began working with what's called chemical communication among animals. And it turns out little rodents and things like this, excellent models to study that, but humans are doing the same thing as we've become to learn, as we've learned over the the decades since I've been in the study of the sense of smell, is that humans are doing just the same sorts of things that guinea pigs and other animals are doing, even domesticated animals are doing, and that is communicating a lot of information about themselves to other members of their community. And people are doing the same sorts of things as well. We didn't know about it in the 1980s, and slowly began to emerge in the 90s. And now it's very clear that there's a lot of information that people are sharing with respect to chemical communication. But that's taking it a little bit further than what I followed through, even though we did publish studies on human chemical communication, showing that, for example, there's something in the underarm of males that will influence the menstrual cycle of females. And in fact, it modifies the hormones that influence the menstrual cycle of females. We don't know what that compound is. My colleague, George Preddy, is the chemist behind that all, and we were tracking it down. And unfortunately, George died a couple of years ago, and so we never got to complete that project. I hope someone else picks up on it. But that's just one of the areas that I began working on. We continued often in other areas having to do with agricultural impact, how the local communities were affected by smells from pig farms, dairy cattle, even mushroom growers were having difficulty because of they call spent mushroom soil. They had to deal with this medium in which they would grow mushrooms, but it was a very short-lived medium, and then they had to do something with it, and they sent it off to compost piles. And as those piles of dirt began to basically to boil boil away their smelly components, it wafted down into the communities. So we became involved with the agricultural communities in Pennsylvania and tried to find ways to reduce or eliminate the odors that were coming from those sources.
That's really interesting.
And then also along the way, obviously, being at the Monell Chemical Senses Center, I learned a lot about taste, even though specifically my lab didn't do very much work with human taste, even animal taste. We certainly learned a lot from my colleagues that were there, and the number of seminars that we attended and things of that sort.
That's great. So one thing that I like to ask scientists, and I know that you are now retired, but let's pretend that you're still working in this field. What would be your ideal study? And let's say you have unlimited resources, because I know that's always a factor. So if you had unlimited resources, what would you want to study in regards to smell?
Oh, the emotional impact that it has, and then how it in fact does provide not only social odors among people, but our enjoyments of food, beverages, even the things that we bring into the home to enrich our environment. It's not just the smell per se, but it's how it influences our responses to them, even at the unconscious level. People are quite attuned, at least at the subconscious level, to the odors that they're sniffing, to the point where if an individual is around another person who has recently been stressed, that stressed person is giving off an odor that may not be perceived in the sense that we know that the individual has been stressed, but it will influence the smellers responses for example, in a test situation where you're looking at how quickly a person can complete a task. That's in a laboratory setting, an example. And it does have a significant impact on how the individual does perform. Something in the stress odor is modifying the smeller's capabilities, whether it's cognitive, whether it's hormonal, stress levels are affected. There's still so many doors that can be opened to determine what's going on. So I think there's a lot going on in the human body and in the human mind that smells make a huge contribution. And we'll probably get to this a little bit later in our talk here, but I'm hearing in my current role as patient liaison, which is to respond to individuals who have issues with their senses of taste and smell, some very, very significant comments from individuals how emotionally distraught they have become. As you're probably quite aware, as an organizer of an organization that meets more often with these individuals than do I, how affected these people are by the disturbances that they are currently facing, especially with taste, which does in fact carry over to their interpretation of smell, of taste. I'm sorry, especially their impact on smell, which does impact their perceptions of taste because of the confusion that people have between taste and smell. And maybe we can touch on that a bit later too.
Yeah, well, that actually leads me into this question, which is you retired as a scientist from Monell, but you have come back and you're doing the job of patient liaison. So you're providing information to people who are experiencing taste and smell disorders. So what motivates you to do that, and what do you get out of that?
I wish I could say I got a great salary, but I don't. I don't at all. I'm doing it because I know there's a tremendous need out there for it. And I've always felt that my contribution is to not only feel good about myself and making a minor contribution here or there along the line, but making people not only aware of what their capabilities are with respect to taste and smell, but how those sensory systems impact their lives, their emotions, their responses to other people, even their daily living in the communities. And to have these individuals now in a situation where they're no longer in contact with their smell environment or their taste environment, it is a devastating impact on these individuals. And I think that while I personally cannot help them, I'm not an MD, I can't do testing on them, I can't prescribe medications for them, but I can provide information and I can provide guidance for them. And it's like organizations like yours to whom I direct, but I also give them access to other websites. I give them access to literature. I give them access to basically to knowledge and to self-taught little exercises that they can perform to show them exactly what's going on between taste and smell, for example. And it's quite enlightening for some people when they find out, when they complain about they can't taste a darn thing, when they go in their doctor, they said, I can't taste the food I'm cooking. In fact, if they do the right things, they'll find out that they can experience sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. Those are the basic tastes. That's it. And the rest of it is coming from smell. And
I think to your point,
it's an eye opener.
Yeah, I think in the general public, there's a lot of confusion between taste and flavor perception. So I think, and maybe I'll get your thoughts on this too, but when people are saying that they can't taste their food, I think a lot of the times they can probably taste the basic taste, but they're probably not experiencing flavor anymore because they don't have smell. And that is some confusion in the general public. Is that kind of what you think as well?
I think, to use that old analogy, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. It's probably not till COVID has come along that we've realized that there are people who do, in fact, um, lose their sense of the true sense of taste along the way.
Mm-hmm.
They may also have lost their sense of smell. And in fact, for those individuals, it's really devastating.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
yes, it's it's a confusion. It's a major confusion, but people do lose their sense of taste, although the frequency of occurrence of that is much lower than that of losing the sense of smell.
Yeah. So STANA, we are supporting patients who have taste and smell disorders, kind of what you're saying with knowledge and things of that nature, because currently there's not very much that people can do in terms of a cure for, like, let's say, anosmia. There are maybe some potential treatment options that could help depending on the causation, but for the most part, like, we don't have a cochlear implant for the nose yet in my instance. So I guess what I'm asking is, what are your thoughts on treatment options in the future? Like, what would you hope to see happen for anosmia, as far as like a treatment or a cure? I don't know if that's the right word to use, but what do you think could be very exciting in the future about this?
I think if we just take a step back further from actual treatments now, before we even get to that point, we've got to be able to have people interested in getting that far. And the way to get people interested is to have maybe even professional organizations, especially from the the groups that are treating those individuals, they themselves should become much more aware of how much of an impact taste and smell has on the daily lives of individuals. From my experience dealing with people, and you and other organizations who have daily interactions with these people, some of these people are extremely depressed,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them are even suicidal. And people should not reach that point, especially when there may be treatments available. They may be in the future. We've got to be able to not only find support for research for those, but also for clinical trials and everything else that need to be done. And there has to be a starting point on this. And I think that's going to be in the physician's offices. And those physicians have to have some sort of background training, not only in the exams that they give on an annual wellness um, uh, visit, where they look at hearing, they look at vision, and they may look at balance. They certainly look at motor responses and things of that sort, and strength issues. But they rarely, if ever, address issues with taste and smell in that general wellness exam. And I think that's one big step that we need to get those physicians to be able to accept. They won't accept them also unless they get some, or at least their hospital or their office gets some financial backing on that from the insurance agencies, insurance companies who are
Right.
providing the funding for medical treatments. Once we get to that point, then I think then the next point, which would be the the clinical component of it, and the research combining and looking at issues that people have, for example, using stem cells to replace olfactory neurons in the nose. That those are currently at the research stages. Monell is doing some of that work, as well as other university settings. Uh, there are currently some clinical trials underway looking at certain specific treatments directly on the nasal epithelium of the nose, the olfactory epithelium in the nose to treat that epithelium directly to see if whether that stimulates regrowth of a new set of sensory neurons from those basal cells or stem cells that are currently existing in the nose, which don't seem to be doing what they should be doing, which is to divide and make new emerging sensory cells that can be making connections to the brain. That's a normal process that's ongoing in normal life. But when you have these insults that result in anosmia, which damages the olfactory epithelium, there may be some scarring tissue, there may be some death of those mother cells that no longer will provide the other maturing cells that can replace them. So if we can get into that area and place surviving stem cells, those mother cells, and let them do their multiplication and have these new neurons emerge and make connections with the brain, then that's a good step forward to having people replenish and revive their sense of smell.
Absolutely. So what I think about when after in reaction to what you just said is, I've shared this previously, but I had a baby last year and he's going to be 1 next month. And
congratulations.
Thank you. To me, it was fascinating that within 12 hours of birth, someone came in and tested his hearing. So they came in with a cart, they put the little electrodes on him and they tested his hearing within maybe 8 hours of being born. And I just thought that was, we need to get there for smell. And how do we go about that, where we have baseline testing for people to, first off, have it even tested at all. And then secondly, I'm not sure how you can baseline test an infant for smell, but maybe people are working on that already. But I think that's where we need to head, is people, in order to understand and appreciate their senses of smell, need to know if it's less than it used to be. And in order to do that, you need baseline testing.
That's certainly the case. And one of I'm reminded by the comments that were emailed to me about a mother who brought her baby in, and she thought that the baby wasn't responding to smells in the environment, and the doctor, the neonatologist, pulled out I think it was either some vinegar or some ammonia or something like that, and put it on a swab and put it under the baby, and the baby reacted. And if you've ever had vinegar or ammonia stuck under your nose, you know that you can get a pretty good sting out of that.
Yeah,
that
isn't that the
not
trigeminal nerve? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's the trigeminal nerve, and that's not smell.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a reaction to a chemical in the environment. And I don't know whether it was a pediatrician or a neonatologist that responded, but says, well, your baby's got a sense of smell.
Oh, man. So it sounds like we've got quite a lot of educating to do.
Yes. But back to the point about what can be done about that. There are some very rapid tests that are being developed for the sense of smell. We don't know at what age these can be started yet. They're under investigation now to determine sort of, how young can we go with these tests. But these tests that are coming out are very rapid. They're cheap. Unlike some of the tests that are currently on the market, where people are asking hundreds of dollars to perform that or have it performed or the company will send you the test kit, you complete it, send it back, but it costs you $100 to get that kit. And it'll be very difficult to convince any insurance company to cover a test for $100 just to see if you can smell. But if you can get these tests, and they're now available down in the order of $1 to $3 a test, that's affordable. And I think that people can be not only affordable, they're rapid. They can be done within minutes. And something like that can be inserted into a wellness test, or even during an evaluation when a mother comes in with a young child and tries to ask the physician to make a determination whether there's something wrong with their sense of smell.
Yeah, I think so. And again, another example is I just remember as a child going to school and having an eye exam at school. It was just part of what you did at the beginning of the year. I think they trooped you right down to the nurse's office and you did the eye exam
Exactly.
every year. So that was just normal.
And can you see that different that 6 in the colored green spots? You see the red 6 or whatever it is, like, color blindness. Sure.
Yep,
Those sorts of tests.
There. Yep. That's amazing. So I would like to say thank you so much for your time today, coming to speak with us and all of your insight. I think I'm just fascinated with this National Geographic study. Logistically, I just think that sounds so amazing that you guys pulled that off. So to end, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I just think that it's very important for people to become aware of, well, I sort of like speak now. I'm not preaching to the choir when I say this. I know a lot of people who will be looking at this are probably also experiencing many of the things about which we spoke. And it's important, not only you people know that how emotionally affected you are by having lost your sense of smell or taste or both. It's now important that you convince others, especially those others who are in influential positions, to get on the bandwagon and support this effort to bring evaluation of taste and smell into an annual wellness setting in your clinical office, but also to let those insurance companies know that they too have to get on the bandwagon and support this, and also to further advance this whole effort. There has to be funding available at the basic research level, and the only way that's occurring, at least in the US, is through federal support. That's generally coming from agencies like the National Institutes of Health or the National Science Foundation. And it's those people also that need to become much more aware. And to their credit, NIH has put more money into looking at especially the individuals who have been affected by COVID and have lost their sense of smell and taste. There are millions of people who have been affected by this. And now the whole issue of long COVID is showing its ugly face as well. And something's got to happen along the way. These people cannot complete a lifelong, enjoyable life without, once again, having their experiences of taste and smell.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those thoughts. So you mentioned you're the patient liaison for those who are suffering with smell and taste disorders at Monell. So if those who are watching are interested in contacting you or contacting Monell, how can they go about that?
I think they should just start by going to monell.org, MONELL.org, and explore the pages there, and you will see there is, in fact, an access point for inquiries. And it's that access point where you can choose which kind of inquiry that you'd like to submit. If it is, in fact, clinical, there will be a little box you can click there, and it'll take you to the appropriate web page, and you just fill out the information, and there's a place where you can describe. I don't know how long they'll let you go for it, but I've received pages and pages of input from individuals, and I don't mind reading, and I will certainly respond.
Thank you so much for joining us today for STANA STANA Sensory Insights. It was really amazing to speak with you, and I just really appreciate your time. So thank you.
You're most welcome. Goodbye.